Hello, everybody. This is John Ginoli from Pansy Division.
And I'm Chris Freeman from Pansy Division.
We are here to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the release of Pansy Division's first album, Undressed, which came out in February of 1993. So we have several guests that we've invited to chat with us who were involved with the band at that time. And so we want to share those conversations with you.
So here's our last guest, who is probably one of the most important people in our history, um, Larry Livermore.
All right. Well, we're here today with Larry Livermore, one of the founders of Lookout Records, to talk about Pansy Division's first album, Undressed, which came out in February of 1993, 30 years ago. Hello, Larry.
Hi, John. Hi, Chris. Great to be here.
So my first question was going to be, how did you find out about Pansy Division? But I also had a quick question because when John said the date of the release, we're not really sure what the actual date of the album's release was.
Well, you joined the club. I'm forever getting inquiries from fetishists, vinyl fetishists of sorts who say, "Didn't you know that today is the anniversary of such and such band's record?" And I'm like, I don't know. How should I know? In fact, I had a
You only had a few records that you released, so you should be able to remember them all.
Well, the thing is, my perception of a release is different from the industry perception because, and this is something, as you know, we worked with More Damn Records with Ruth Schwartz, who's a brilliant woman who set up that whole company and made what we did possible. But she was very much on industry standard, whereas we were a bunch of crazy kids in a room in Berkeley. And so basically, to us, the record came out when we got some, and we started mailing them out and giving them to stores and radio stations. But to her, there was a fixed date, and it always had to be a certain day of the week because that's how things work in the industry. And so she might know. I wouldn't know. 93 sounds about right since we are celebrating the 30th anniversary. But the exact date, I have no idea. Usually we tried to get records in our hands and into Ruth's warehouse well ahead of the official release date. So in some cases, that might be even months when it was officially released. And that may be the case with you guys. Maybe we were able to give you a box or two of records long before it was officially out for your shows or whatever.
I could swear for years that even though I didn't know the exact date that it came out in March of 93, and then I was on Discogs just last week, and I thought maybe Discogs will spit out the date, the actual date, and it didn't, but there's a promo copy of the album, like a white label without any album artwork, with a one-sheet tape to it that says prospective release date, February 5th, 1993. So that is the best information I have.
Dates were sometimes pushed back. What you saw is actually a test pressing. By that time, we were doing at Ruth's direction, we were doing about 30 to 40 test pressings of every new album, and then she would send them out to all of the distributors and stores with a one sheet like you saw.
I see.
And if she had her way, that would happen like a month or two ahead of the release.
Well, and then also we had a show that same date at Bottom of the Hill, so it's possible we could have said that's our record release party.
So when did you first become aware of us?
Well, I was given some thought to this actually, and I kind of envisioned Pansy Division before it actually happened. That may sound weird.
No, me too. For years.
Yeah, no, I know. And we were kind of on converging paths without even knowing each other's existence. It was not so much like I was trying to be Svengali and say, oh, I should put together like a gay punk band. It was more like, yeah, that would be a good thing that there should be something like that. And I don't know exactly where or when it will come from, but I should keep my eye out. And, that's something that needs to happen. And so somewhere along the line, while I was from time to time musing on this subject, I first heard some kind of buzz about this guy that was forming a band called Pansy Division. And not too much after that, the demo tape that you made by yourself came into my hands. This was before Chris was in the picture.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who gave it to me. I don't think it was you, because I had not met you in person yet.
Right.
And the demo tape, as you'll recall, I think you did have some other musicians on it, didn't you? It wasn't all, but they weren't members of the band. But I saw a lot of potential in it. I said, well, this is basically what I've been thinking should happen. Probably needs like a little bit more, of a band feel rather than a guy with some session musicians. But other than that, this is basically exactly what's going to happen or needs to happen. And so then I found out that you were doing a show at the Commotion Club, the one that was kind of a
Performance space as opposed to a bar.
Fancy. Well, it was like, no, but it was a collective, the Commotion Collective that
And they had a studio and stuff on the side too.
Yeah. So I said right away, well, I'm going to go check this out. And in fact, you played that night with, I guess, I don't know if you had a backing tape or not. As all I recall, it was you and a guitar amp, and you may or may not have had a backing tape for the rhythm section. Did you remember?
I think I only did the backing tape once. So, but I don't remember where I did it. Backing tape didn't work out too well.
Yeah, but it seems to me that you did, at least for some of the songs, use the backing tape, because it was kind of like a band, only it was one guy.
Right. That didn't last long, but that's very possible.
When I picked bands for Lookout, I tended to do it pretty quickly and impulsively, including both Green Day and Operation Ivy. It took me about 30 seconds in the case of both of those guys. And it's not just because they were both obviously so good, because I did the same thing with lots of other bands that sold a few million less records, but who had a good feeling. And my take on you and your songs was right away, yep, this is Lookout material. This is exactly what we need, but it's got to be a band. And so now you may or may not remember this, but I came up to you right after you finished and I said, get a bass player and a drummer and you got a record deal.
I don't remember that. I do not remember that.
And I was talking about like serious business, so I tend to remember these things. That's where our recollections seem to maybe be a little bit different, because I've read, might be in your book or in an interview, where you talk about like scouting out different record companies and trying to get their attention and stuff, when in fact with Lookout there was no scouting out or trying necessary. I mean, you had a deal from the minute you started, whether you knew it or not.
The thing is, did you identify yourself as being from Lookout
I generally did. Otherwise, people didn't want to talk to me.
Because
they might talk to me, but they were more likely to talk to me if I said record label.
Well, I certainly knew what Lookout was at that time, but I don't remember that. I really
might have thought I was just some random weirdo who maybe knew somebody at Lookout but wasn't really from Lookout, or like people do that sometimes, like, hey, I'm a friend of so and so, blah blah blah. But, I actually.
But you were working for a record distributor, so you were the one who told me about Green Day's sales, John.
Yes.
You were the one, when we were looking, you were like, oh, Lookout would be good. Look at this band called Green Day that's actually doing quite well on this, and it's a local label. I'm looking at the date, and it's saying October 12th of 1991 was a show at Club Commotion with go-go dancers. And that was before I joined. So that was a good 2 months before I joined.
And I said, get yourself a bass player and a drummer, and you got a deal. And John may have not taken it seriously or not remembered it, and plus he had to get the musicians as well. So, but I don't remember it being that long of a time before he contacted me. You contacted me, John, and said, hey, I got somebody to play bass, and I think we have a drummer. And I says, great, when do we record? And
Yeah, that was
I
2 months later. We played our first show. I played the first show in November of 16th of 91. And then Jay Paget, which was our first drummer live, was on December 15th. That was over at Thunder Bay.
Oh God, in Berkeley,
In
the same
Berkeley.
town as Lookout, but in a different universe.
did Jay play on the first album, or was
No,
that
not at all.
Jay did not. No.
Was that Dustin or
No, it was Patrick Hawley, who was from Champaign, Illinois. I had gone back to Illinois to do demos. I wanted to do demos with the band, and I didn't know musicians yet in the Bay Area. So I thought, I know these guys. My friend had a studio. We went back and did it. So Patrick played on that, and I barely knew him. I knew him a little bit from before I left Illinois, but he played on the album, and then he came out here and played with us to do the last few songs. Though another friend of Chris's played drums on a couple of the songs. So, but Patrick's on 11 of 13.
Yeah, I remember drumming being an issue for a while, actually until Luis showed up, which was not until 96, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the end of 96.
It's always weird communicating. No, not almost always weird communicating with bands because, their place is like, is this the right label? Are they going to like us? Are they going to do a deal with us? Are they going to treat us fairly? Etc. All that is going on in their heads, and typically the label, assuming they're well intentioned, is just like, okay, well, I want to do a record with these guys. What's the problem? Let's get in the studio and do it. But a lot of times wires get crossed, and that communication does not completely come across. Like it can be weird. Like if like a band asks me, "Oh, so what did you think of the new songs?" And I'm like, "Yeah, pretty good. A little bit more polishing. I think they'll be ready for the album." And the band will be like, he hates our songs. He hates us. We're probably getting dropped. It's like these things happen. Yeah. But I never really swerved from the idea from the time that I saw John at Commotion, and I guess you tell me October 91.
Yep.
I from that point, it was my assumption that Pansy Division were going to be on Lookout, and the only question was how soon the band would be together and ready to record. Other drama may have been going on in the minds of the band members, which I can't testify to.
But let me tell you what I remember. If you had told me that you were on Lookout and you were interested in putting a record out, I would have remembered that because I already knew that Lookout was a good label.
I didn't say I was interested. I said, you got a deal.
Well, because as things were going on, I did not have in the back of my mind, oh, Lookout's going to put it out. I thought Lookout's a label that we might want to have put it out. But, there were two other labels that I was seriously considering.
A lot. It's because you worry a lot, John. And also,
it's true. It's true.
And also because you probably thought, well, maybe Lookout's okay, but maybe there's a better label.
Or maybe maybe he sent it out because you don't know how you got the tape. Maybe he had already sent it out, and
I don't think John sent me the tape. I think somebody else gave it to me.
Okay.
It's
but
possible.
It might have already been out there. So in his mind, he's thinking we still have to think about where we're going.
These are almost literally word for word my words, and I'm not extrapolating.
See what you get by actually talking to people and asking them questions? You learn things about yourself.
If you get a bass player and a drummer and you've got a record deal, that's pretty much exactly what I said. That's the way I tended to talk when I was approaching bands in those days.
You know what? Let me tell you something. My insecurity probably did not believe you. Like, I probably thought, we don't even have a band. He's talking about wanting to put a record out. That's ridiculous. That probably would have been my interior thought from talking to you.
Very possible. It's very possible. I would have been the same if somebody came up and offered to put my record out.
I mean, I joined the band weeks after that show. So I already had the tape with me because in October I was on a trip, a 5-week trip in Switzerland, and I had the cassette with me. And that's where I first listened to it. So when I got home, I'm like, I'm doing this. Yes.
And I heard about you joining almost as soon as you did. I don't know from John or somebody else, but I knew about it very immediately afterwards, and I said, "Oh, good, we're making progress. Probably this is
Yeah.
going to happen soon."
But I don't recall ever hearing that it was anything that was a done deal. So I'm so glad that you're saying this, because
Yeah.
it's very interesting, because John was doing all of everything. I mean, at this point, I was just like trying to catch up, putting my trailer on his pickup.
I think the thing that really if anything, slowed it down, it was the drummer issue.
Correct.
Oh, for sure.
My experience was when I decided to go with the band, and especially with a band that would turn out to be reasonably successful, as you did, it was like almost instant. I knew right away, and I didn't mess around or wait for more demos or anything. I just said, you guys want to do a record? And most of the time that worked out.
I love it. Well, the thing is I know that Jello must have had the tape around the same time, because when was the No on 9 thing?
I think it was like May of 92.
Maybe I'll take a look at it, because he called John and left a voicemail saying, "John, I'm up in Portland for the No on 9 benefit, and I just talked to the guys in Nirvana, and they said it would be great to go ahead and put out the Smells Like Queer Spirit." So he was like, "Okay, so let's go." So he must have thought he had a chance somehow.
I mean, my memory is that we were looking at AT or Lookout, but my friend Glenn, who ran Bar None Records in Hoboken, he got interested too, though he hadn't been initially. So it seemed like it was either going to be AT or Lookout, and then Bar None got involved, but then I realized that Lookout or AT would be better for us.
Well, that was at a kind of a crucial time. A transformation was taking place. Up until about 91 or so, AT had been the unquestioned big punk label of the Bay Area, and we were in the course of passing them up
exactly.
Around that time.
And that's exactly what John was noticing by working at the record distributor where he was at. He was seeing that ratio, and he's like, "I think we should go on the elevator that's going up."
So it was probably at the time the best plan was Lookout. Unfortunately, later developments, but
well, that's for another episode a couple of years from now.
Yeah. But that is the story that got us on to Lookout. And then once we got onto Lookout, we did our first album on our own and delivered it to you. And then we, prepared the artwork. So I wanted to hear about your reaction to hearing the album and seeing the cover that we wanted to go with it.
Refresh my memory. Which cover are we looking at? Is this the naked one?
Yes, the naked one.
Yeah. Well, first off, I want to.
He wants to see it again.
Yeah, no, I remember that, and I said, "Well, this is what we wanted." It may be a bit awkward, but we'll get through it. Yeah, I recall seeing the cover art and saying, "Oh, this is going to be fun," and I can't remember if we had to change printers for it or not. I kind of suspect we did.
Yes. I was told that whoever did the cassettes balked at doing the cover. But not
the cassette people were born again Christians, and they just refused. And I think I'm mixing this up with another release. There was one time we had one where the company that printed the labels that went on the vinyl that wouldn't print it, but I think that was a different form of obscenity that they were upset about, or maybe it was something against God.
There were so many to choose from over the years.
I think, and I won't swear to this, but I think because the regular printer wouldn't do your cover, that we went to a new one in Montreal, and they did such a good job on it that I think we kept working with them from then on. One thing I would want to touch on is that Pansy Division, and especially John personally, were a bit different from most of the bands we worked with in those days. I'm not saying it's a bad or a good thing. In some ways, it was a good thing because we were learning as we went along. But most of the bands had little or no experience in the industry and counted on us to pretty much do everything for them. They might give us some pieces of art and we'd have to put it together into a cover, or they might send, they would send us like scraps of this or that, and somehow we would have to put it all together. With John, it was almost too much in the other direction. It was like he did everything. And we're like, well, what are we supposed to do?
Release it, sell it.
It was kind of like John treated us like idiots, which we were, but
well, weren't we the first to ask for a something typed up like a contract of something or something? I think we were the first ones.
It's not necessarily. You might somewhere around that time. No, actually, you may have been. The Green Day, when they started talking to Warner Brothers, we didn't have any contract with them, so I asked them to sign a simple contract for the first 2 records. And at that point, we started doing the same deal with most other bands. But some bands actually refused. They just didn't want any contract. And we were kind of the same way at first. But Kevin Army, do you know Kevin Army, the producer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were working with him a lot, and he had a lot of experience in the record industry before we got involved with him. And he said, look, a contract is not something to be afraid of. It doesn't mean you're selling out or commercial. It's just both parties writing down in language that they can see right in front of their faces what they expect of the other. And it can save a lot of trouble and heartbreak later on if you think, oh, well, I didn't know you were going to keep putting out the record, or I didn't know you wanted us to pay us for every record, or, these kind of things. Often completely innocent misunderstandings. But as I recall with the contract, it was a little bit more formal and more industry standard than we were used to dealing with. And it kind of made it feel like, oh, gee, I don't know if these guys trust us. And, on the other hand, why should they? Because just because a label is independent or punk does not mean that they're strictly honest. Plenty of crooks operate
Right.
both DIY and.
So that would be the idea.
It felt a little bit awkward, but at the same time,
it was a 1-page contract.
Yeah, no, I know, but it was, like I say, a little bit slicker than we were. I mean, eventually our standard contract grew to 7 pages and a lawyer had written it, but that was later on. And so in a way you were helping us grow into being more of an adult record label as opposed to a crazy kid label. And that would go
adult, like adult books and no.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Grown up.
Well, maybe with our album cover,
well, that's what I was going to say.
Which many teenagers bought.
And you can get this at any adult bookstore.
It was like with a lot of bands, it was a process of getting used to the individual personality of the bands. Some bands, they didn't want to really engage much at all. They just wanted to put out a record and collect their checks. And other bands wanted to be deeply involved at every level. Like, Larry, what do you think of the third line of the second song on the new album? And do you think we should change it? That kind of. And each band was different. And some of the bands were extremely young, and the whole idea of even being on a record was totally strange to them. And other bands had been around a bit, and they knew more about it than we did. So we kind of grew up together.